In this tutorial, I will be demonstrating step by step how to draw and paint a watercolor resist painting. The materials you'll be using are watercolor paints, watercolor paper 140 pounds, Liquitex Gloss and Medium Varnish, paintbrush, and water. Let's begin by drawing your idea onto watercolor paper. I'll be drawing a sea turtle swimming in the sea. As I begin drawing, I want to press very lightly with my pencil. This is very important for two reasons. One, you don't want to dent or damage your watercolor paper with the pencil. And number two, you don't want to see the pencil marks in your watercolor painting. As I start drawing, I try to think where I want the resist to be. Wherever I draw with my pencil is where I will be painting on the resist. In my painting, the outline is where I'll be using the resist. This isn't always the case. Sometimes you could use the resist to emphasize details like the veins in the flower petal. On my turtle, I want to draw the shell and some of the inside details on the turtle shell. I'm going to finish off my sea turtle drawing by adding some bubbles. I'll also be drawing some wavy lines to imitate the water movement. After I've completed my drawing, I'm going to erase my drawing ever so lightly. The idea is to be able to see your drawing faintly, but not enough to see it through the watercolor paint. You don't have to erase every last line, but do erase enough, making it barely visible. Then remove all your eraser crumbs from your paper, leaving your paper nice and clean. Now we can begin painting on the resist. I poured my Liquitex into a small container, and now I'll take my paintbrush and I'll start tracing the lines I drew on my painting. The Liquitex will act like a resist. You could paint the resist as wide and as narrow as you like. The resist will act like a border on my drawing, resisting the paint from getting on the paper. As you can see, I'm tracing every single line I drew with the Liquitex Gloss Medium Varnish. I am applying it thicker than my lines, and I'm doing it on purpose because when I start painting on my watercolor paints, I want to define certain areas with the resist. Now I'm focusing on painting with the resist the smaller detail areas I would like to emphasize, like the details on the turtle's flippers and head. Once you're done painting on the resist, allow the resist to dry completely before beginning to paint with the watercolor paints. It's time to begin watercolor painting. The Liquitex Gloss Medium Varnish has completely dried and we can begin to watercolor. I like to have my watercolor paint tray prepared ahead of time with the watercolor paints I will probably be using. I'll be using wet on dry method for painting. That means I will be painting using watercolor on dry paper. Always try to begin using light colors in your watercolor painting and transition into darker color as your painting progresses. The best way to make white is to leave the area unpainted. It is easier to go from light to dark in watercolor painting than it is to go from dark to light. I do not want this turtle to have one solid color, so I'll be adding more colors to my turtle. Another watercolor tip is to not make everything look perfect and even. When painting things in nature, try not to follow any particular pattern unless it calls for it, like a butterfly. As I paint, I want to blend one color into another, making a transition and creating a pattern for a more natural effect. If you use only one color on your painting, it may look somewhat flat and be less appealing. Always try to begin using light colors in your watercolor painting and transition into darker color as your painting progresses. It is easier to go from light to dark in watercolor painting than it is to go from dark to light. So for my turtle, I'm going to create a gradient color effect. If you're not feeling comfortable using the color gradient technique, take a small piece of watercolor paper and practice blending 2 or more colors. You want them to blend gradually into each other without getting muddy. When using watercolor, you must be very gentle with the paper because overbrushing it could cause the paper to deteriorate quickly. Always brush softly with your paintbrush on your paper so you don't end up rubbing your paper and causing it to disintegrate. Now I'm going to begin painting my water. I have already made the watercolor paints that I am going to use. I have different hues of blues. I always recommend that you make enough paint or even extra paint on your paint tray before you begin. You don't want to run out of paint while you are painting and lose time making more, causing your paper to dry. Before painting on my water, I am going to use the wet on wet technique. And because my paper can dry very quickly, I will be only wetting my paper one section at a time. I'm going to start on the top and work my way down, gradually going darker as I descend toward the bottom of my paper. When painting the water, I will be doing a color gradient effect. I want a smooth transition from one color to another. This will help add depth and shadow to the painting. When using the gradient effect, try not to overdo it. Don't make it obvious. As I work my way down, I want my water to become gradually darker. But I will first begin with my light colors and gradually add darker colors in the area I desire. I also want to create some depth between the turtle and the water, so I am shading the area of the water next to the turtle somewhat darker. When painting the seaweed, I want to show some different hues of greens to create some different colors of seaweed next to each other. The seaweed should show some variation of colors from the top to the bottom. When you're almost done with your drawing, be sure to go back and add any final details you may have missed or need to add. Remember that when watercolor dries, your colors will appear lighter. If you like this video and want to see more contents like this from my channel, please like and subscribe down below.